discernment for this process that you're in the midst of, because it's really important to remember that you're not just hiring someone, you're calling someone to whom you're entrusting leadership and care for this congregation and community. So there's going to be a personable and a spiritual perspective to your interview and time together. It's important to remember that this is a spirit-led process. So to help ground ourselves in the discernment part of this process, let's consider Romans 12:2. Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of the mind, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect.
Take some time to get to know one another and form a team together. It is very important to trust one another within this circle of people. Speak your gut feelings and share open and honestly. Everyone on the call committee has an important voice and will have different responses to pastoral candidates. Please always make time to check in with each individual and take into consideration what they are feeling, experiencing.
This is one of the most important things for the call committee to do. When receiving candidate profiles, the names and information in their rostered minister profile is for call committee members only. It is essential that you not share candidate information such as name, congregation, family situation, or where they live with others. It can be very difficult for a pastoral candidate to have their name go to a congregation. Remember that this is a mutual discernment process. A pastor allowing their name to come to your congregation may still be in discernment about whether they are ready to leave their current congregation. We want their ministry to be honored so that if or when it comes time for their congregation to learn that they will be leaving, they can receive that news directly from their pastor and not through the grapevine. The Lutheran world is quite small. You never know the situation that a candidate is in, and we don't want to ruin the process of discernment. The candidates have placed great trust in you by sharing of themselves. Please honor your work and theirs by keeping strict confidentiality. Now, all that being said, communication with your congregation is also vital during this process. Please do share with your congregation regular updates about developments in your call process. You are welcome to share, for instance, that your call committee has received one or more names, that you have conducted an interview, that you're moving forward with a candidate or releasing a candidate. The information not to share is simply any identifying information about the candidate, their name, congregation, family situation, geography, etc.
We'll now cover first interviews and second interviews, which often are in person. If you have multiple candidates located within and outside the synod, or you have one candidate not geographically near to you, your first interview will be done using Zoom, Teams, or other technology. Do a practice run using the technology you will be using for the interview. Try to limit these interviews to 1.5 hours max. You can choose to invite as many of your candidates as you would like for a second in-person interview. These will need to occur separately. In-person interviews are a good time to follow up on things you might be curious about based on what you've learned about the candidate so far through the first interview, viewing their preaching and worship leadership. Plan on limiting these interviews to about 2 hours.
As you put together questions for your candidates, keep in mind that oftentimes a behavioral style of interviewing that encourages storytelling and creating conversation can be a helpful approach to take. Oftentimes at the beginning of an interview, it might help to start with a getting to know you sort of question. A few options for this first introductory question could be, what's your favorite hymn and why? Or tell us about your call to ministry. Or maybe, we know that ministry has been challenging for many pastors in recent years. Why have you decided to remain a pastor? What's kept you inspired? As you put together the rest of the questions for the interview, consider the top gifts for ministry that your congregation identified in your ministry site profile, and then think of questions that prompt the candidate to describe concrete instances in which they've demonstrated those gifts that you're looking for. Craft the questions that are contextual to your congregation and community. So for instance, if you're wanting someone who's going to be gifted at working with confirmation youth, you might say a bit to the candidate about why that's really important to your congregation, and then prompt them by saying, tell us about a time when you led a confirmation class that resonated with youth. Or if you're looking for someone who can deal effectively with conflict, you might give some background about conflict within your congregation and then prompt them, tell us about a time in which you encountered conflict as a leader. How did you handle it? What did you learn from it? In summary, often a good format for questions is to share a little bit about a particular need in your congregation or a gift that you're looking for, and then to ask about an instance in which the candidate has demonstrated that gift in the past. Not all questions need to be heavy. Look at the candidate rostered minister profile, and it's okay to ask a few questions that are personalized to that particular candidate.
So remember, this is a mutual discernment process. And so an effective interview works two ways, with the candidate also bringing questions and concerns to the call committee about the congregation, its mission and vision. The candidate may also have questions related to your ministry site profile. Allow time in every interview for a candidate to present questions or concerns.
We strive to answer the candidate's questions with the same openness and honesty that you hope they are answering your questions with. If this candidate winds up being your pastor, they're going to experience all the aspects of ministry in your congregation. It's better for everyone to be aware of what you're getting into up front. And as a call committee, you want to know who a candidate is right now, not only the pastor they are wanting to become in the future. In the same way, make sure to represent your congregation as it is currently. Be aware of how this might differ from who you were, who you would like to be as a congregation.
After each interview, plan for about 15 minutes to check in with one another and reflect on the time that you've had with the candidate. It may be that you need more time than that 15 minutes, in which case you can schedule a separate meeting afterwards. Sometimes that's helpful. It can be useful to take notes during the meeting with the candidate that you can use to reflect on during that time together. Also, remember that prayer is a crucial part of your discernment. Make sure to pray together and for the candidate. Once you've reached a consensus and determined if you want to move forward with the candidate, reach out to them and invite them to an in-person interview or to be your candidate of choice. Allow the candidate to have time for discernment. You can choose to release a candidate if you do not think they will be a good fit for you. And if you do decide to do this, you do need to let the candidate know directly and then also to let us at the Synod office know. Think through together with your committee how you're going to respond to the questions that you get from candidates. And this includes thinking through some of the logistics. For instance, in those first interviews that are likely going to be conducted on Zoom, keep in mind that Zoom doesn't pick up multiple people talking at the same time. So you're going to need to coordinate with one another who's talking first so that you're not talking over one another. Also, if you're the type of person that tends to jump in first, consider taking a step back when candidates are asking their questions. And similarly, if you're the type of person who tends to quietly hang back, challenge yourself to consider what you might have to contribute. If the candidate asks a question that one call committee member has particular experience with, for instance, if they ask a question about youth ministry and one of the committee members is a confirmation sponsor, it might be most appropriate for that person to have the chance to respond to the question first. Also, be careful to use, when possible, I, me, or my statements when you're responding to candidates' questions. And the reason for this is that when you're using those I statements, there's more space for others to speak about their personal experiences too, even if they might vary from yours. And this can help give the candidate a sense of the breadth of experiences and perceptions in your congregation.
Mock interviews are designed to be a practice for the call committee, to do some trial and error with the pastor chosen to do this exercise. Because you're not going to call this pastor, you are able to ask your questions with the intent of the pastor giving feedback on the question. This is also a time where the pastor can give helpful criticism and help shape your questions, responses in a way that is authentic to your congregation's context. The pastor will have access to your ministry site profile for review and will come prepared with questions, concerns, and even hopes that they have for you when they interview.
So let's chat about hospitality for those in-person interviews. Hospitality is going to be really important. during these in-person interviews. Keep in mind comfort. So as a call committee, you need to discuss how and where the interview is going to be done. Keep in mind the importance of confidentiality in this as you're thinking about where in the congregation you might be doing that. Think about how you're going to be sitting, the space in the room that you're going to be, where the pastor is going to sit, and how you as a call committee want to present yourselves. If hosting the interview at the congregation, have a designated person be ready with a short tour of the property. Candidates will likely perceive the hospitality that you show during this in-person interview as a reflection of your congregation's culture of hospitality and welcome as a whole. Consider putting together a gift basket of local candies, chocolates, or cheeses. Make sure to include a tour, maybe not just of the church building itself, but also the parsonage, if there is one, and of the community that you're located in. It's helpful to arrange for a shared meal separate from the actual interview, maybe at someone's home or at a local restaurant. If the candidate does have a spouse, do invite that spouse for the interview as well, understanding that their presence is warmly welcome but entirely optional. Due to work schedules, childcare responsibilities, etc., they may or may not be able to be a part of that visit. If the spouse does come, plan on inviting them to any hospitality, like the meal together with the committee or the tour of the church building and community. But just make sure that you do not include the spouse as part of the actual interview. For budgeting purposes, as you're preparing, keep in mind that you'll be covering the expenses related to travel, lodging, and meals for the candidate and the spouse invited to the interview. Ask the candidate to send mileage. Use the current IRS mileage rate for those who drive for the visit, and or itemized receipts for their expenses related to the visit. Arrange to reimburse the candidate promptly, and if reimbursing the candidate means that the treasurer or the bookkeeper needs to learn the candidate's name to make out the check to them, that's okay. Just make sure that the treasurer or the bookkeeper understands that need for confidentiality and that they're not going to share that with other folks.
When you receive the candidate profiles, it can be a very exciting time for the congregation. However, you as the call committee have been lifted up to do this important work. You may share with the congregation that you've received profiles and will begin interviewing, but they cannot know names or when times of interviews will be. Just simply ask for their continued prayers for the call committee and pastoral candidates. Keep in mind that each candidate interviewing with you is likely interviewing with one or more or other congregations within or outside the synod. It's important that each candidate knows when they can expect to hear from you next, and that you do not keep candidates hanging, wondering what's going on or when they can expect to hear from you next. Your communication with each candidate is a reflection of your congregation's culture of hospitality, clarity, and organization.